heard and to have influence to the greater benefit of the Council's interest. I don't think there's any job quite like that of Chief Executive of a Council. In earlier days, there was a town clerk. It was a slightly different function in many ways, with a legal background usually. Nowadays, the job calls for much broader talents, with a focus, I think, on delivery, on sustaining the quality of services, and, of course, on the management of finance. And the Chief Executive is undoubtedly a leader who has to have a wide range of skills. He's skilled in partnership working. He has intellectual rigour. He needs many of the top politicians' skills without being a politician, if I can put it that way. An underestimated skill is the precise use of words and their deployment. And Cleland, I think, in many respects, had that particular skill in spades, and it does support the smooth running of the Council. I'm sure there'll be further public uses you'll be put yourself to after retirement, but hopefully also more family time. And we do wish you well on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group after this very strenuous period in office that you've had, which I'm sure hasn't given you that much time for family life. We wish both you and Geraldine well in your retirement.
Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Provost. I'm not got a great deal to add. I'm like to associated with all the positive things that have been said by the previous speakers. I think, Geraldine, yes, it has been a pleasure to work with you. And I think Joe, in saying the fairness in which you operated in is by far the best words to use and the most important. Maybe I haven't always agreed with you, but I could always understand with where you were coming from, and thank you for all your support during that time. What can you say about Cleland? As one of those who wanted him here, I think you've delivered everything that we envisaged when you were employed, Cleland. You gave a clear thought process on everything you did. And we're able to think globally or laterally, whichever you want, however you want to consider it, which was a great deal of help in moving the Council through, particularly in the difficult times of when we started through COVID. You've been very complimentary about the Council itself and how we've been conciliatory and working together. And I think a fair percentage of that needs to come down to yourself in the way that you operated as Chief Executive, and that it made it possible for us all to work in that collegiate way, and therefore a great deal of thanks. And much as I'm very pleased to see Paul coming into that role, I think it is very disappointing that you have lasted so long and we've burnt you out so quick, even with a good Clydesdale education in you. But thank you very much for your work in the last as Chief Executive. Cheers.
Colleagues, one final piece of business before we move on to the fixed agenda. I thought it would be entirely appropriate for us to pause for a moment and reflect on the tragic events that are ongoing in Gaza and Israel. There are, of course, very diverse and very strong opinions about what is happening in that part of the world. There are high emotions and loud voices on both sides, so much so that it is unfortunately very difficult to see any room for compromise or debate, let alone peace, at this time. As I think you would expect, I have no intention of getting into the politics of these awful circumstances, but I think it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge the huge pain, suffering and loss in both Gaza and Israel. So on behalf of all of South Lanarkshire, I would hope you would join me in offering our deepest sympathy for those who have lost loved ones or experienced pain and injury themselves. It remains a fraught situation, and frankly, I don't think any of us have any idea what the solution may be going forward. There is nothing we can do that is not merely symbolic, so I'd invite you to join me in a minute's silence to remember the dead and hope and pray for the living. Colleagues, I'm going to move on now to the agenda for today. And item 1.
As you know, the SNP group submitted an emergency motion on the crisis in Gaza, which you declined to accept, stating that you were going to make a non-political and non-partisan statement, which I appreciate you've just done. But I would just like to say that we are most unhappy that our motion wasn't accepted. A minute's silence is a nice gesture, but this is not a time to be silent. The Council isn't being given the opportunity to discuss this, and we were calling for a ceasefire, a humanitarian corridor, and the establishment of a resettlement programme through the United Nations. And I just want our discord recorded that we're most unhappy that we weren't given the opportunity to discuss.
And your comments have been noted.
Thank you.
Any political group or independents within the meeting today are free to write to whomever they feel in our Scottish Government or British Government as part of their own group. But I'm not opening it to a political debate in the chamber today.
I wasn't asking for the Council to write to anyone. I was just asking that it be noted that the Council supported the calls for a ceasefire and a humanitarian corridor. Thousands of people have died since yesterday when I submitted that.
I'm not continuing. I've not accepted. I didn't accept your motion, and I'm not accepting any further discussion on this.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. Another point of order. It would appear that democracy and accountability are dead in South Lanarkshire. 2 motions were submitted to allow councillors to discuss and debate the McRobert report and Employment Tribunal findings regarding SLC and outside bodies. Both were ruled out of order and blocked by officers. Both reports are public documents which are highly critical of South Lanarkshire Council and the political administration at that time.
Councillor Watson.
Sorry, as councillors, it's our duty and our right to scrutinise officers and the political leadership regarding actions and decisions taken. We're being denied that.
Councillor Watson. I'm bringing in Geraldine McCann to comment.
Thank you, Provost. It would never be appropriate to discuss the outcome of an employment tribunal, which the McRoberts report related to, which involved another body at a public meeting of the council. This could result in content being discussed that should not be discussed involving either employees of that organisation or employees or former employees of the council, and could result in a breach of the councillor's code of conduct or a breach of the Data Protection Act or UK GDPR. It could also result in defamatory comments being made against individuals, which would involve the councillors themselves perhaps being subject to civil litigation. So that's why it's not appropriate to discuss matters of that nature at a public meeting. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Geraldine. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Provost. As the person who put these motions forward, I'm disappointed that they are not on the agenda today because they were never withdrawn. I have taken advice from elsewhere.
Councillor Allison, I'm not continuing with this. It's not competent.
It is competent in the view. My next statement is that I have taken advice that motions put forward we can get advice as to whether they are competent or not, but it is up to this council to decide whether they wish to take it forward. And that is the point of order, is that we are not being allowed to decide, not discussing it here today, but deciding whether we wish to. And is this council, the 64 members eligible to be in this room, who should be taking that decision?
In again here, just to give us another ruling on this.
The question of competency is a question that would be decided by officers in terms of the 1989 Local Government and Housing Act. There are a number of statutory positions in that Act that relate to governance, and two of them are the head of the paid service and myself as the council monitoring officer. So it was based upon the powers in that Act that the decision was taken that the motion was not competent to be added to the agenda, and it was no different to what has been done in the past, where members have been advised in advance that motions were not competent and they did not appear on the agenda.
Councillor Watson, I'll
Just, Provost,
hear what you have to say up to a
your
point.
indulgence here, but there's a mute point here that we as councillors abide by our code of conduct, and I'm happy to abide by that, and I've been threatened by my code of conduct by officers in this council unjustifiably, and I'm happy to stand by that. But I would say we abide by a code of conduct. What is the code of conduct for officers that are taking decisions when they've had a material influence in decisions that were taken back then, and are now taking decisions to block what we want to discuss as councillors?
Stop you again there, please. There's different routes to complaints, and if you feel that you've had some sort of blocking by officers or maltreatment by officers, there's obviously a route to take that forward. In regard to this particular item, I've ruled that we're not going to discuss it. The motions were overruled by Geraldine, and I'm going to give Cleland a minute or two just to add to that.
To be fair, Provost, your last statement probably covers this. The Provost ruling is final on this. In relation to officers' code of conduct, yes, there is an officers' code of conduct. There is nothing in that code of conduct, however, that would create a breach where officers are reflecting legal advice, and ultimately the decision on competence and what can go onto the agenda sits with the monitoring officer and myself as the head of paid service in reflection of that legal advice. And that is, as Geraldine's mentioned, those powers are in the 1989 Act for those two statutory roles. So there is no breach in relation to officers' conduct. Officers, you may not feel it, you may not agree with it, but officers' conduct and decision-making around this issue is actually in protection of the council, and it's in protection of the individual elected members. However, going back to your final point, Provost, you've already ruled. That's the end of the matter. Thank you.
Okay, can we move forward now? I'm not allowing any further discussion on that particular matter. Are there any declarations of interest for today's meeting?
Thank you, Provost. I'll declare an interest on item 8, the motion regarding the neonatal unit at Wishaw General. I sit in the Health Board. I feel it would be inappropriate to be in that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Okay, can we move to item 2 in the agenda, please? Pages 5 to 22, minutes of previous meeting. Can we agree those? Agreed. Item 3, minutes of risk and audit. Apologies, I can't see past this screen.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Booster seat.
I could take that comment personally. I need a booster seat over here.
Councillor Loudon.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This is starting to feel a little bit moot, 40 minutes in, but I will do it anyway. It's a quick question for the Provost, because she'd made a statement at the last meeting of the full council, which isn't reflected in these minutes. And I can see, looking around the room today, that some clarity will be of benefit to many of us across the chamber. Several years ago, we took a decision that councillors would no longer automatically be provided with hard copies of council papers, which can run to over an inch thick sometimes if they're printed, and instead we're now provided with electronic copies which we can access on our council devices. As part of my carbon literacy training earlier this year as a member of the Climate Change Committee, I reaffirmed my personal commitment to avoid printing or using paper when I can. In the chamber, like many others, I use my laptop to read papers, read any notes that I've taken and make my own meeting notes. So my question is, could the Provost please confirm if these are reasonable and allowed activities in the chamber to do so on a laptop, and that councillors will be able to continue to carry them out without facing further rebuke as we have previously? Thanks.
This topic has come up several times in regard to people using laptops inappropriately, in my view. There are certain times when it's quite clear that people are sitting sending emails. I can see from where I'm sitting when that happens, and that they're not emails that are appropriate to the topic that's being discussed. I have no problem with people using laptops in the chamber to access their papers. Absolutely, we're not trying to cut down forests every time we come to a meeting. Some people prefer a paper copy, and I have to admit some of us in the room are dinosaurs and find it easier to access paper than it is to access notes of a meeting on their laptop. So I'm quite happy for that process to continue. I have asked in the past that people mute their laptop so that every time an email comes in, there isn't a noise. And I've also asked that about mobile phones. But that practice continues. People are not muting their phones. There's a buzz noise or whatever you've put to alert you to your emails incoming. And that still continues even this morning. So there's no problem with people using laptops to access their paperwork. I've no problem with people who feel they prefer a paper copy sitting in front of them. I do have a problem with people who are working on their laptop on work which is not the topic of the meeting that we're involved in at the moment. Difficult to differentiate, but it's a plea that we concentrate for the best of the constituents in South Lanarkshire, that we concentrate on the fabric of the meeting and the papers that we're viewing in the meeting. It's quite easy to see from this position when people are texting on telephones and reading emails on their telephone. I do think that we owe our constituents the gravity of paying attention to what's happening within the meeting, and that when you leave the meeting, that's a chance to check emails, send texts, or make any phone calls. So I think my position's quite clear, Councillor Loudon. Laptops are acceptable. I ask for volumes to be turned down on them, and I would prefer if people, I can't enforce it, but I'd prefer if people are concentrating on the paperwork involved in the meeting for the benefit of their constituents. Thank you. No, I've given you my explanation. You asked for that. I've given you it, so that's it. Councillor Brown.
On a slightly different matter, I put in an item for urgent business. It's normal, I think, at the beginning of the meeting to indicate that would be accepted, which I think you've kindly said it would be, yes. Just for the interest of other members, so they know it's coming up. I just wanted to make that point, if I might, and ask that perhaps it be formally noted at this part of the meeting.
Yes, happy to note that it's 2 days. You asked 2 days ago, you asked for the urgent business, and that was accepted. Okay, moving on to the minutes of Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Lambert. Can you press your button again if you wish to contribute?
Hi, Legal Service. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes.
Thanks. Point of order, unfortunately, Chair, if you can allow me. Just to raise that there was a misrepresentation by Legal Services on the previous point. The motions that were put forward by Councillor Watson were not intended to re-litigate the Employment Tribunal or discuss that in any ways at all. It was actually to discuss how SLLC deals with external bodies because of failings highlighted and how we prevent them in future. Thanks.
Could I invite Geraldine to respond to that?
Sorry, Councillor Lambie, I didn't quite hear what you were saying because it was quite the sound was interrupted. Could you possibly repeat that?
It is very difficult to pick you up, Councillor Lambie, from the... If you just can take your time, please, just to maybe make it a wee bit clearer. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully I'll just speak a bit louder. It might come through. So the point of order was just in relation to how legal services responded to the previous point. The motions that were put forward were not intended in any way to relitigate the Employment Tribunal or to discuss matters of the Employment Tribunal.
Councillor Lambie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
It is a point of order in terms of the
I've already made a
misrepresentation.
ruling in this, Councillor Lambie.
This is a new point of order that I've raised.
Not taking any further discussion on it. A ruling has been made. Thank you.
It's a different point of order.
Okay, can we move on now? I'm still attempting to get agreement on the minutes of the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee. Agreed? Thank you. Okay, items for noting. Standards Commission's hearing outcome, pages 29 to 32. Agreed. Can we agree them? Agreed, thank you.
Councillor Loudon.
Councillor Loudon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Item 4, paragraph 4.6 in these papers, almost in its entirety matches a paragraph on page 9 of the publicly available written decision of the hearing boards. There's only minor changes such as punctuation and minor textual changes such as changing the respondent to the name of the councillor. However, the paragraph in our papers contains 7 substantive points, whereas the written decision contains 8. Point 8 is a sentence which reads, "The panel further noted that the respondent had been encouraged to disclose the information by her group leader." Can I ask, why has this sentence been deleted from the end of this paragraph when it is a matter of public record in the written decision of this hearing, and who made the decision to remove it? And I've potentially got an amendment after this, Provost, depending on the answer.
Geraldine.
Thank you, Provost. The report was never intended to be a verbatim account of what happened at the Standards Commission hearing. It was a summary of the decision, and I've made it quite clear in 4.9 that the full decision is available on the Standards Commission for Scotland website. The other point that I would like to make is that the decision of a councillor to take certain action is a personal decision, so therefore that is what is commented on by the Standards Commission. It doesn't, although it may influence the councillor decided to act to release the confidential information, and that is the basis of the Standard Commission decision. At 316 and 317, that's set out in paragraph 3.2 of the Code, where they held that the confidentiality requirements of the Code were breached. It was not an attempt to conceal any matter, because I have pointed the public towards the Standards Commission for Scotland website to read the full decision. There has already been a report at the previous committee, the previous council meeting on the related issue, so I felt that it didn't need to be repeated here. I also pointed out the mitigating factors, and the decision was censure, so perhaps that was taken account of. I can't comment because I wasn't at the Standards Commission meeting. It was held in private. But this is a summary of the decision. It's not a verbatim account. Thank you.
Councillor Loudon.
Thank you very much, Provost. Respectfully, I've got to disagree with that. I don't think it's satisfactory to include 7 points and to call that a summary and to miss out an 8th point when the text of the 2 documents is practically identical. The hearings panel clearly thought the information was relevant and pertinent and saw fit to include it in their written summary. It's clear that it's a point that which they used to make their decision on the censure. It was considered by them to be important contextual information and to be taken in the round when considering Councillor McAdam's actions. In the interests of openness and transparency, and so that the public record of this council reflects the public record elsewhere, I'm going to propose a brief amendment. It's a simple one. At the end of paragraph 4.6, insert the line which is missing from the written decision back into this paper. The sentence being, the panel further noted that the respondent had been encouraged to disclose the information by her group leader. Thanks, Provost.
Do you have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ross.
Councillor Nelson.
Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. This is an item for noting. Do we take it as an item for noting, or can we bring forward an amendment? Because it is an item for noting in the papers.
Geraldine.
This is, you're correct, Councillor, it is an item for noting. It's not an item for decision. In terms of the Standards Commission, I was asked to bring this to the attention of the Council. I've done that and the paper is there. I've also reiterated that the full decision is available on the Standards Commission website for anyone to read the full decision, because it is a very detailed decision. The report, I couldn't have done it. I don't routinely do this when I'm reporting Council Standards Commission decisions to this Council. I don't attach a copy of the decision. I just referred you to the website. Thank you.
Councillor Convery.
Chair, Councillor Nelson has just reiterated what I said. That's why folk laughed. It's not a laughing matter. It's an item for noting. Let's agree the item for noting. It's agreed, it's done, it's been put forward, and let's go on with the real business at providing services for people in this council. It's now nearly 11 o'clock in the day. It's an item for noting. It's not for discussion, putting forward amendments and all this nonsense that goes on in this bloody chamber. It's an absolute disgrace. Let's go on to the next business, and I'm moving that formally.
Yeah, can you just guard your language, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I apologise.
That's fine. Geraldine, can you advise me on whether I'm required to accept the amendment?
It's not asking for the decision of the Council. It's only asking the Council to note it.
Okay, right. I'm not accepting the amendment, Councillor Loudon, and we'll move on. Can we agree that we have? Oh, for God's sake.
Right.
Councillor Loudon.
Geraldine, could we have some clarity on that? Can an amendment be accepted on an item for noting as it has been before?
Geraldine.
It's routinely, it's not accepted because it is only for noting. So it's not asking you to make a decision. You're not being asked to do something. You don't have it within your powers to make a decision on this matter. The Standards Commission are the panel who made the decision, and that's only being reported to you.
But respectfully, it was accepted in previous council meetings. An amendment has been accepted on a point of order. While we don't have any locus in the decision which is made by the panel, we have locus as councillors sitting in this chamber as what goes on record as the public record of this council. And Councillor Convery can sit there as much as he wants and talk about the business of this council, but the people of South Lanarkshire deserve openness and transparency in this council's dealings.
Okay. I'm going to come in here, if you don't mind. The recommendation, I'm not accepting the amendment. That's my final decision on that. The recommendation is that the decision... Councillor Ross, I've already... It's not on accepting the recommendation. I'm not talking about the recommendation. I'm not accepting the amendment. It's not about accepting the amendment. Right. If it's a valid point of order, I'll hear it.
I just feel that an awful lot of times... I just feel that an awful lot of times when Councillor Convery comes on, he starts to shout and try to bully people by the way that he addresses this council. I don't think it's acceptable. An awful lot of people do not like the way that he addresses this council. And all I would ask him to do is to look at and try and measure the way he speaks to people in this forum going
Councillor
forward.
Ross,
Thanks
I've
very much.
already spoken to Councillor Convery about that. He made his apology to the meeting, and I'm sure he'll bear that in mind for any future contributions that he's making. In regard to this report, I have ruled that I am not accepting the amendment. The item is for noting, and the recommendation is asking that the decision of the hearing panel of the Standards Commission for Scotland that Councillor Monique McAdams had breached paragraphs 316-17 of the 2018 edition of the Councillors' Code of Conduct be noted, that the decision of the hearing panel to censure Councillor McAdams be noted. Can we agree that we're noting the contents of the report in front of us? Councillor Clark.
Will this discussion be put in the minutes, considering the amendment wasn't accepted?
This meeting is live streamed and minuted as it takes place.
But will this discussion, what will be minuted from this?
There is not a verbatim record in a minute. There will be a note of the key points of the discussion during this meeting. I'll put you to Geraldine.
The minute will not be, is not verbatim because the live stream is there. It's a summary of what was discussed at the meeting. There will be the fact that an amendment was proposed. That will be noted in the minute and rejected.
Thank you. Okay, we move on now to items for decision, colleagues, and I'm going to have a 5-minute break for BSL users. Can you please, if you leave your seat, be back promptly at 11:05. I'm bringing that thing up. Right, we're at items for decision. We're moving on to recommendation referred by the Executive Committee, Annual Investment Strategy 22-23, pages 33 to 34. Who's going to present? Paul. Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Listen, I'm happy to speak to this. This is a report that's already been to the Finance and Corporate Committee and the Executive Committee, but because of the regulations that sit around this, it has to go all the way to the Council. So the paper is basically noting those facts, and in terms of recommendations, as it says there at 211, that the recommendation of the Executive Committee in relation to the Annual Investment Report for 2022-23 be approved. So thank you, Provost.
Okay, can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you. Item 6, changes to deputy chairs, committees and joint board memberships. I think there was one or two last minute things brought to Geraldine this morning. Pages 35 to 36, and I'll invite Geraldine to bring us up to speed with that.
Thank you, Provost. The report seeks various changes to some committees as chairs and deputy chairs and memberships. These are set out in 3.1 of the report, and they were proposed by the business manager of the Labour Group. The recommendations seek that Councillor Williams replaces Councillor McClymont as deputy chair of Social Work Resources Committee, that in relation to Housing and Technical Resources Committee, Councillor Cowie replaces Councillor Walker as a member, Councillor Cowie replaces Councillor Lennon as Deputy Chair, and Councillor Walker replaces Councillor Keat as a substitute member. And finally, that Councillor Williams replaces Councillor McClymont as a substitute member of the South Lanarkshire Integration Joint Board. Although it's not contained within the report, there was also a recommendation that Councillor Mark Horsham continues in the role of the Council's Armed Forces Champion. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Geraldine? Okay, can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you. Item 7, review of UK parliamentary constituencies, review of polling districts SL 002 and SL 007. Can I invite Cleland to speak to that?
Thank you, Provost. Again, I'll make this reasonably straightforward. This follows the 2023 review by the Boundaries Commission for Scotland. I'll maybe go straight to the recommendation because they summarise the position quite neatly. So, Council is being asked to approve the following. So, firstly, the new boundaries for the constituencies of Rutherglen, East Kilbride and Straven, Hamilton and Clyde Valley, and Motherwell, Wishaw and Kirlook, and Dumfries, Clydesdale and Tweedale being noted. And we have 3 of those constituencies wholly within South Lanarkshire. We share 2 with other areas. We are effectively the junior partner in those other areas. So Council is being asked to note the changes in returning officer responsibility for each of the new constituencies. Recommendations 3, 4 and 5 note the requirement to create additional polling districts to align the boundaries, and these are shown within the report and the appendices that show the kind of plan detail. And finally, recommendations 6 and 7 relate to the redrawing of the boundaries for polling districts to reflect the removal of new polling districts in each area, and that reflects the reduction in size. So, Provost, with those recommendations, I'll put those to Council for agreement. Thank you.
This one. Notice of motion downgrading of neonatal care unit at the University Hospital Wishaw, pages 43 and 44 on your report. and I'm going to invite Councillor Nelson to speak to his notice of motion.
Thank you, Chair. Provost, for allowing me to bring this motion forward. First of all, I'd just like to welcome Mum and Baby Kai, who have came along this morning, a long morning for them, and I'd like to welcome them here along this morning. There was hopefully some midwives coming along, but they've been unable to manage so far. Also, this motion was being seconded by Councillor Poppy Corbett, who was unwell this morning, and in that essence I have now sought that Councillor Shailene Handybode will second this motion and will speak directly after me. Provost, on the 25th of July this year, the SNP Scottish Government released the Neonatal Intensive Care Options Appraisal Report regarding the reorganisation of neonatal services in Scotland. This rightly has been debated in the Scottish Parliament, both brought forward by Labour and the Conservatives, but these were voted down by the current SNP Green Scottish Government. This report suggests that there should only be 3 to 5 neonatal intensive care units providing care to the sickest, most premature and smallest babies before moving to reduce 3 neonatal intensive care units for Scotland. This will mean ultimately the downgrading of the established neonatal intensive care unit at University Hospital Wishaw, which is an award-winning neonatal unit. Families have already expressed significant concerns about these changes through an online petition that has been signed by over 16,000 people. This goes to show that the neonatal unit is nationally recognised for its sterling work, and only this year was awarded Multidisciplinary Team of the Year. Also, a dedicated TV documentary was carried out by BBC Scotland in the award-winning unit. Surely this goes to show that the unit is working in keeping our newly unwell born babies and families safe by providing the dedicated care and treatment that they require. NHS Lanarkshire is Scotland's third largest health board that serves a population presenting unique challenges such as socio-economic deprivation and mental health challenges, which also include maternity mental health and childhood adversity. Not will this only affect mums, but dads and extended families who have reported to suffer from PTSD following a lengthy stay in NICU, and moving vulnerable people away from the supported network could be catastrophic. This downgrading will result in a high loss of function, key service for babies and their families in Lanarkshire, across Scotland and England. I have fears that the process carried out has been flawed from the outset, as I believe that NHS Lanarkshire was not appropriately represented in the decisions that affected them, nor were their clinical experts from NHS Lanarkshire Neonatal consulted. Why was the Chief Midwife not on the board of these decisions, when other health boards did involve them? Data that was used to come to this decision to downgrade the unit, in my opinion, was out of date and used from 2015, which clearly shows a failure in this process. I also believe that the scores used for the neonatal unit at University Hospital Wishaw are better than other units in Scotland. And while I do not think they are any better or worse, it shows that something is just not right. Also, the Scottish Government are ploughing money into developing transitional care, a service that has been well established in Wishaw for almost 12 years. Again, something is just not right. In my opinion, the service provided by this unit, which the SNP Scottish Government must address and will be part of their manifesto, no doubt, is that this should all revolve around family-centred care. And I do not think that the general public are aware of the effect that this will have on newly born unwell babies and the families involved. Any child who has been ventilated for more than 48 hours will require to be moved to a neonatal unit, which could be away as far as Aberdeen. That's over 150 miles from this building. This will then have a knock-on effect for the Scottish Ambulance Service, which is already at breaking point and will put more lives at risk. Again, was the Scottish Ambulance Service involved in these decisions? The consultant team and professionals at the neonatal unit have also raised major concerns and flaws with the SNP Scottish Government and Health Minister, and have written to them with their concerns, which are still awaiting an answer. Some of my main concerns are around the due process, which is why was the Chief Midwife not involved in the decisions? Why was out-of-date data used to score the decision-making process? And has the Scottish Ambulance Service been involved in the process, and what effect this will have on the service for the transfer of babies to other neonatal units? In closing, Provost, I would urge all in the Chamber to get behind this motion to protect our babies and families, and I propose that this Council writes to the SNP Scottish Health Minister and calls for a full independent investigation into the decision-making progress regarding the downgrading of this award-winning unit at University Hospital Wishaw, with active participation from the professionals at University Hospital Wishaw's neonatal unit. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Can I also welcome Mum and baby Kai to the meeting? It's a wee bit lengthy this morning. Sometimes you can be lucky, sometimes you're not. But we're glad to see you here. Councillor Handybode, are you seconding the motion, and do you wish to say anything?
Yes, thank you, Provost. I would like to second the motion brought forward by Councillor Nelson. Like Councillor Nelson, I am greatly concerned about the downgrading of the neonatal unit at University Hospital Wishaw. This award-winning unit serves as a lifeline to our families, and the SNP Scottish Government must address this matter urgently. Has the review considered the detriment this downgrade will have on our communities? It is my understanding that in clinical practice, to avoid any movement of a micro-preemie, a baby born before 30 weeks, we should be cautious, yet ultimately we could be transferring babies to Aberdeen. There are many questions and very few answers regarding this situation, and I urge all members here to back this motion. We must request a full, independent investigation into this decision to protect our babies and families.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. And I'd like to begin with thanking Councillor Nelson and Councillor Handybode for bringing this motion forward. It's a very important campaign, and I'd like to thank the number of people who I've spoken to in the last few days for sharing their experience for the unit for me, and especially thanks to Tammy and Kai for coming in today, especially when it's such a long meeting. But Kai seems to be napping, so fingers crossed he continues to. I come to this from a bit of a personal angle. I am a mum of a premature baby. Erin was born at 34 weeks. And we were lucky enough that Erin was strong enough to go directly to Skibo and not need the neonatal unit or the intensive care unit. But I've had the experience of the fear and the pain of having a baby at such an early gestation. I can honestly say the shock and trauma that it causes parents and families mean they do not need to add the added pressure of not knowing where their baby is going to go or whether they will survive the journey. Over the past few days, I've spoken to a number of families about the importance of the unit remaining at Wishaw. Families who have had babies born at 24, 25 and 26 weeks gestation, where the award-winning team at Wishaw saved their babies' lives, sometimes literally multiple times, and the unit became their support service as well as their babies. The praise they have for their staff there is high and as I've ever seen, and many people cannot thank them enough for the work that they've done. They spoke about how unthinkable it would be for them to have if their babies were moved to Edinburgh, Glasgow or Aberdeen, and how they have heard stories about how little beds there are in Glasgow and Edinburgh available, and the reality would even mean the north of England. Many of the parents tell me in their circumstances this could have meant the difference between life and death for their baby. I think it's important to let the people who have used the unit's voice to be heard. I spoke this week to one mum whose both babies had spent time in neonatal after being born at 28 and 26 weeks. She is sure her daughters wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for the doctors and midwives in the unit after her babies were very sick and spent some time in the unit. They are now thriving, and that is all down to the unit. I spoke to a mum whose baby was born in Paisley at 27 weeks. The baby couldn't continue to be looked after at Paisley, so she was transferred to Wishaw after there was no beds in Glasgow. A number of times she was called away during the night after Luca became very ill. And if she had been further away, there would be no family support to see him through no family support to help them through their most difficult times. And finally, there is baby Alfie, who was born 3 months early and had to spend a significant amount of time in Wishaw in order to learn how to breathe, feed and fight infection on his own. These stories are not in isolation. There are many, many more that I've heard. And I don't have time to tell today. These babies are here today through the care given to this unit, both to the babies and to their families. This decision seems to have been made with very little consultation with users of the unit, with the staff in the unit, and with the community that uses the services. We are in a ridiculous situation that the government is praising the unit for being award-winning, the best in the UK in one hand, and on the other hand talking about downgrading it. Taking away that expertise, that knowledge, and putting lives at risks. You will see the strength of feeling in the local community with the amount of people who have signed the petition. As this motion mentions, there is a number of concerns that the right process has not been followed. This process started in 2015 and we live in a different world now. The SNP and Green government and their health minister, who is new to the post, need to stop this, take a pause and listen to the local community, the people who have used the unit and the staff who work there, and stop the downgrading of this vital resource in Lanarkshire. The Labour Group support this motion.
Are there any further comments or questions? Can I ask if you agree to the motion to write to the Scottish Government? Thank you. Okay, we're moving on now to item 9 on the agenda, notice of motion removal of fire appliance at Hamilton Fire Station. And I'm going to invite Councillor Nelson to speak on this.
Thank you, Provost, for allowing me to bring forward my second motion today, which is just as important as my last motion and shows the continuing reduction of funding for frontline services and the impact that is having on local lives. It must be noted that my trade union colleagues in the fire service are warning that SNP cuts are a threat to lives, homes and livelihoods for everyone in Scotland. A recent report by the Fire Brigade Union of Scotland has identified serious concerns within the fire service, with firefighters raising important issues about response times and the reduction of fire appliances. My motion specifically addresses the removal of the appliance in Hamilton and the pressure that this will put on the retained fire service. Firstly, I would like to mention the retained service in my own ward of Larkhall and the impact the loss of this appliance in Hamilton is having on that service. This service relies solely on on-call firefighters who need to be in and around the town and respond via a pager system. Some of these firefighters are already working excessive hours to maintain emergency cover. They have to leave their current employment to attend emergencies, which puts added pressure on individuals and their work commitments. As call-outs for the retained firefighters increase due to the reduction of the appliance in Hamilton, Larkhall and other retained services will have to respond outside their area, leaving Larkhall and other areas with no cover. This also affects the retained firefighters' other employment duties. What if they cannot get away from their full-time employment duty? This could leave no cover and a disastrous outcome for our local communities. Looking at the recent devastating fires in East Kilbride, the Fire Brigade Union pointed out that Whiteley's local fire station was empty because its 2 appliances and crews were in Edinburgh for training. Normally other stations would provide cover, but they were hampered because appliances had been removed. The Fire Brigade Union have stated that the response times are increasing around the country due to cuts, and every second counts in a fire. A 1-minute delay can feel like an eternity when trying to keep someone safe in their property until crews arrive. In the recent fire in Ayr at the Old Station Hotel, firefighters were noted to be stripped of vital equipment as fire crews based a minute away had to wait 20 minutes for a specialist fire engine as their high-reach appliance had already been removed. Another blow came when the Kilmarnock fire engine broke down, with the nearest appliance all the way in Castlemilk in the south side of Glasgow. Is this the kind of service that we all want to receive, one that will keep us safe? I also find it hypocritical that the Green MSP Maggie Chapman was protesting against firefighter cuts despite being in the government that actually agreed on that budget. If people in the Scottish Government are now against these cuts, it shows a very divided position in the SNP Green Scottish Government. These cuts and the removal of services are of great concern to all of us and put lives at risk in our own communities. I urge all members here today to come together to support this motion, to write to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, to reinstate the appliance in Hamilton and to ensure that the SNP Scottish Government provides fair funding to the Fire Rescue Service. And Provost Councillor Mark McGeever will second this motion. Thank you.
Councillor McGeever.
Thanks very much, Provost. I don't intend to repeat what my colleague Councillor Nelson said, but certainly to associate myself with it and try and complement it. The changes to emergency service provision often get criticised by local elected members, and it's important to note that this case is fundamentally different. It's not the usual situation because this is a change that the experts who are running the fire service don't want to make. They're not making the change because they think there's a better way of doing things or they can deliver the same service in a different way. It's been made because they've got to save money. Their budget doesn't go far enough, basically, to provide the level of service that we're used to and the level of service that they think we need. Now, there is a reason, as has been alluded to and spoken well by Councillor Nelson, as to why Hamilton has 2 fire engines and crews. And it's a common message from the service that in an emergency every minute, every second counts, and we'll hear that this week even in the run-up to bonfire night. And that's why they're always urging us to have smoke alarms, because every minute counts. The extra time that it will take to get a second fire engine, a second search and rescue crew, a second set of cutting apparatus to get people extricated from a serious collision on the roads, that extra time will have consequences. Hopefully not tragic consequences, but we can't be sure of that, and nor can anyone else. And it's important we say so. Now, I don't want to cause fear and alarm. I don't want to make the public think that they will have inadequate cover, because I'm sure that the fire service will do everything it can do to shuffle things around and to mitigate the consequences of this enforced change. But they will be mitigating consequences. They will not be removing the consequences. They cannot remove the risk. The truth is, colleagues, that when the fire service has to cut its cloth in this way, it inevitably means cuts to the safety of our community, to the extent of our fire and rescue cover. And it's entirely right that we as a council say so today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. I just maybe want to make comment on this motion, and Councillor Nelson touched on it, but the pertinence of this motion cut home last week in East Kilbride with a tragic and devastating fire in Whitehills in East Kilbride. And it was quite clear from the comments from reported in the local press from firefighters that these cuts were a consequence of the extensive damage that resulted from these fires. And in passing the motion as well, which I hope we do, I hope we can pay respect and acknowledge our firefighters. We face danger every day they turn up at work. They don't know what they're getting into, and to be cutting their resources can only be making their job more difficult and putting them in even more danger than that they actually face on a day-to-day basis. But happy to support the motion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to show my support for the motion. As Chair of the Safer South Lanarkshire Board, when the matter was discussed, when the Area Commander, Jim Quinn, brought the information to the board, it was quite distressing to hear it. I did meet him prior to that. He did tell me that it was coming, so we discussed it at the board. But one of the things that's quite concerning, I've just read something that's reminded me of it. When Mr Quinn intimated that there would be a proposal to reduce from 2 to 1 at Hamilton, it'd be on a temporary basis. Now, the question has been asked several times, how long is temporary? And we've never had an answer to that. I raised concerns about when you reduce from 2 to 1, it's got to have an impact on the service, because, as Mr Quinn had alluded to, every time a fire appliance attends to a fire, there's always 2 appliances. But you can't have 2 if there's only 1 in the station. But that'd be backed up from places like Motherwell, Bells Hill and East Kilbride. Now, it's obvious, I'm stating the obvious, but if Bells Hill are occupied in something that they're addressing, or Motherwell or East Kilbride, it's going to have an impact on how the service can respond an incident. And there's another issue and it has been touched on. I think it was Councillor Watson that touched on it about the road incidents. Hamilton Fire Station looks after the M74, which is right on its doorstep, which stretches a long way down to Dumfries and Galloway. So if appliances are attending that distance, it's obviously going to have an impact on attending incidents that happen locally. There was another issue that's not in this, but Councillor, forget your name now. Anyway, the proposal, Councillor Nelson, Richard, I know Ms Richard, sorry Richard, forgetting your second. Councillor Nelson touched on the situation in Ayr about the high reach appliance. Now, that was discussed at the Safer South Lanarkshire Board as well. Now, Mr Quinn intimated that in his long time in service, in his role throughout his career, it's less than a handful of times where he's actually seen that appliance being used. Now, and I made the point, let's hope they never needs to be used. But when they do need to be used, they need to be there. And if they're not there, then they can't be used. And to sum up, Chair, less is never better. And when you're talking about situations like in White Hills and East Kilbride, thankfully, there was nobody seriously hurt. I don't think there was anybody hurt at all, but that's short of a miracle when you look at the damage that was caused to those properties. And if fire appliances had attended more timelessly, the damage could have been less. And who knows, as I said, thank goodness there was no injuries there or fatalities, but that could have happened. And where would we be sitting? In a situation where we'd be looking at fatalities due to a cut in a service. It's not right, it's not proper. And I know that funding is an issue for police, fire, local councils, the health service. But when you look at something as important, and who can say that one service is less important than another, but when you're talking about the fire service, every second counts, not every minute, every second counts. And if there's a delay in response, it's going to have an impact. So, Chair, I'm supporting this motion on behalf of the Labour Group. Can I say one thing further, Chair? I did seek guidance from Geraldine McCann on this. As Chair of the Safer South Lanarkshire Board, I was hoping it's a scrutiny role that we have, in case anyone doesn't know that, but we don't have any powers. And I sought guidance from Geraldine, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to convene a special meeting to give a response. I'd hoped to convene a meeting of the elected members, but Geraldine advised me that the fire, the police and everybody else who attends the Safer South Lanarkshire Board are all equal members. So it was a kind of futile exercise to try and do that. So just for members' benefit, that was something that I did consider, but and Geraldine, carrying out her role as meticulously as she does and has always done, advised me that that wouldn't be possible. So the motion, I think, goes a long way in addressing and making your feelings known to the government that these cuts are unacceptable and that appliance should be reinstated back in Hamilton. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matthew Buchanan.
Thanks, Provost. I too would like to welcome the motion, although it is unfortunate that it's become necessary. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service finds itself in a position similar to our own. They've had real terms funding cuts for over a decade, and that's set to continue with flat cash settlements until 2027. For 2024-25, the service will have to find over £14 million, which could mean the loss of 339 firefighters or a further 18 appliances. So the fire in my own ward in East Kilbride South has already been mentioned, and the reasons for the delay have been mentioned. There was no crews at East Kilbride at the time, and there was no cover provided, as would previously have been the case. It took over 10 minutes for crews to arrive on scene. I've actually heard some people quote as many as 17 minutes, by which time a small bedroom fire, which could have been contained, was out of control. So by some miracle, nobody was hurt. Homes can be rebuilt, and the community has rallied round the families. Each family was handed over £2,000 just this week, which I'm incredibly proud of. But this fire is a warning, and we have to hear it loud and clear. What does it take to reverse the cuts? Further delays in response time? Unavoidable fatality? It's life and death, these cuts, and they have to be reversed. Not tomorrow or 6 months or a year from now. They need reversed right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Yes, thanks very much, Provost. I I attended the last area committee, Hamilton area committee, where we had officers from the fire service who came along and explained this operational decision. I must say that every political party at that meeting had raised concerns that this was indeed the right way forward. And I think we all left that meeting with the feeling that this was not the right decision that should be taken by the fire service. So on that basis, we are happy to support the motion today.
Thank you. I just want to add that as Provost, I fully support the motion today as well. We live in the west of Scotland, one of the most densely populated areas in Scotland, and any reduction in such a significant service is bound to have an impact on the safety and security of our residents and other residents around in adjoining councils. So I fully support the motion. Can we agree, please? Oh, that was good. Are we all agreed that the letter will be sent? Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to item 10 now. Future of Strathclyde bus service. And I'm going to invite Councillor Fagan to speak to this.
Thank you, Provost. Over the past 18 months to 2 years, this Council has adopted stronger and stronger positions on the bus sector. I was pleased that one of the last motions approved by the previous Council rejected voluntary solutions to the deepening crisis in the Strathclyde bus market in favour of democratic alternatives. This motion restates that position very clearly today, but this motion also sets out evidence from SPT's new Case for Change document that demonstrates to the Council just how badly the deregulated market is failing Strathclyde, and why I believe councils across Strathclyde should be pressing for those democratic alternatives to become a reality. Specifically, and as a minimum, a Strathclyde-wide integrated bus network under a common franchise, delivering a level of connectivity and affordability that the market has failed to provide to our towns, our biggest city, and our outlying and rural areas. Preferably with a municipal operator in there, in my opinion, alongside community operators and the private sector, but I accept there are a range of views on models of ownership, but absolutely with a London-style franchise to enable the integration and coordination of services and the reinvestment of profits back into the network. There are 4 separate bodies of work I want to draw the attention of the Council to, and I would strongly encourage members to familiarise themselves with these reports. The first is a 2021 report co-authored by the former UN Special Rapporteur Philip Alston and the Centre for Human Rights and Social Justice at New York University, which found that our deregulated bus services are so costly, so fragmented and so dysfunctional that people cannot access basic public services or employment opportunities. The second is a SISTRA scoping study which assesses reform options as the provisions of the 2019 Act come on stream. That study finds that a voluntary bus partnership agreement is unsuitable for delivering transformational change, and that the so-called BSIPs, bus service improvement partnerships, are unsuitable for delivering cheaper and fully integrated fares. To achieve more efficient, faster and reliable bus services with better integration and cheaper and simpler fares, as is common in so many other comparable city regions across Europe and soon in Greater Manchester and Merseyside, a significant transformation in our bus network is required. And the SISTRA report points very clearly to bus franchising and municipal options as being the only options that can achieve that level of change. The third report to highlight is a recent Centre for Cities report, which Councillor Gowland and myself attended the launch of last week, finding that the small size of the transport network in Glasgow and in the Glasgow region, as compared to other regions of similar sizes elsewhere in Europe, is holding our economy back, and that the Glasgow's relative underperformance could be costing as much as 4.6% of Scotland's GDP. And finally, ask councillors to consider the extensive evidence set out very clearly in SPT's Case for Change, some of which I've included in the content of this motion. And that is evidence of long-term decline in services and in bus patronage, while we have increasing fares. The bus market is broken. The deregulated model is preventing us from achieving the integration and public control, not as an end in itself, but as a means to achieve better outcomes. So I'm calling on the Council to restate its position and encourage our neighbouring councils to follow us, to demonstrate that we will not tolerate a failing system any longer. It's time to scrap the broken bus market, put passengers before profit, and build a modern, integrated, affordable, coordinated bus network for the people of South Lanarkshire and Strathclyde. Thank you.
Councillor Convery.
Very brief. Somebody uses the buses all the
Hold it, hold it.
Sorry.
I haven't got you. No. Right, okay, you're okay now.
Right, thanks, Provost. Provost, I'm going to be brief. I'll formally second it. And as somebody that uses the bus service, I see a decline, and it's something we need to address and arrest. And Joe eloquently put the message forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross Gowland.
Thank you, Provost. Margaret Thatcher's deregulated model of bus provision has been a disaster for people across South Lanarkshire and has hastened the decrease in bus passenger numbers across Scotland and South Lanarkshire. As a regular bus user myself, I know how stretched the local bus services can be. Public transport is an important tool for our communities in the fight against climate change and for a just and fair transition. The SPT Case for Change report highlights that as recently as 2018, the transport sector made the largest contribution to greenhouse gases in Scotland, and there are stretches of the M74 that are some of the most polluted locations in Scotland. 15% of the whole SPT region is income deprived, compared with 10% in the rest of Scotland. In my rural Clydesdale South ward, there are serious bus black spots where residents are poorly served by public transport, and these villages are some of the poorest in South Lanarkshire. Indeed, the Scottish Government should be reopening railway lines closed by the beaching cuts all those years ago to reconnect our towns and villages across South Lanarkshire. This council supports the Larkhall, Lesmahago to Stonehouse railway extension, and we hope to see movement very soon. SPT supports community transport to the tune of over £1 million across Scotland. Further community transport is desperately needed. One example is the 3C Express service organised by Climate Action Straven, which runs from Straven and Stonehouse to Glasgow. It launched in October 2022 and runs 12 times a day. The bus has been very popular with the community. But we need more bus services like this, and we need action. The changes to the Transport Act in Scotland, which come online in December, open up the opportunity to reverse the failures, and there is now a compelling case for changing the model of bus provision across the Strathclyde region to create an integrated and democratically accountable bus franchise. Thank you, Provost.
Councillor Gladys Miller.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, we welcome this motion from Councillors Fagan and Convery, and also the contribution from Councillor Robb. We would like to strengthen this motion and emphasise all of South Lanarkshire by drawing attention to the requirements of our rural areas, and these requirements be factored into a proposed change of model. I think we're all aware of the issues, but this has really highlighted the sustained decline in bus service availability and use. The SPT partnership paper notes the decline of people using bus as their main mode of transport to travel to work. However, we know the current problems that workers have in getting to and from work as a result of this decline in service and the delays. An improvement in service may assist in retaining and attracting workers to our rural areas. So I would like to put in an amendment to strengthen this motion and include our rural areas. And I understand that Susan has a copy of that.
Have a seconder for that?
I do. I understand Councillor Robb is going to be seconding this.
Thank you. Councillor Robb, do you wish to comment at this stage?
Yep. Thank you. I'm happy to second these additions to the motion and commend Councillor Fagan for bringing the motion to give us a chance to move this issue forward. The amendment which the SNP are putting forward and myself seconding incorporates these additions I've discussed with Councillor Fagan, and I'm grateful to him for the chat we had about it. My amendments seek to raise awareness of the success of the Under 22 bus scheme, which is helping to create a new generation of bus users important for the future. They also call for the Council to provide more information on how they will use the £300,000 Community Bus Fund allocation that they've got to support services and act on this motion. My amendments and the SNP additions highlight the importance of quality community engagement to identify transport needs and aspirations, like Climate Action Straven did, and also to emphasise the importance of public transport for our rural areas. Thank you.
Councillor Fagan, are you willing to accept these amendments?
I'm happy with those the amendments.
You're happy to accept those to be included. Thank you. Councillor Mark McGeever.
Thanks very much, Provost. It won't be long. Members will be relieved to hear. On behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group, we certainly add our voice to those supporting this motion, which by the looks of it is going to be everyone, and very glad to see that. It was ourselves that put forward the motion that the Leader of the Council alluded to as the last motion of the previous Council, and I was glad that that also received cross-party support, and I think this one sensibly builds upon it. Access to effective, efficient and affordable, crucially, public transport is absolutely vital if people are to have access to employment, education and services. It's also crucial for businesses and public sector services to have access to their staff and customers. Within South Lanarkshire, our towns, villages and districts don't have great connectivity with each other by the bus network, as I know many of us will be aware, and it's certainly the case within my ward. Never mind going beyond that into the broader Glasgow City region or the Strathclyde region. The very worthwhile schemes like the Under 22 bus pass are great and should be supported, but they mean absolutely nothing if people cannot get a bus to where they need it to go. And I hear often from people who cannot get a bus to get to college or university or to work, and that includes people who do absolutely essential jobs in the public sector and the health service that we need, and we are forcing them away from public transport, which they would like to take, and into private vehicles with all the problems that goes with it. So we know there are solutions to this. It works better in London, it works better in city regions across Europe and the wider world, even the United States, where the most kind of capitalistic model you can imagine. But when it comes to the bus networks, that's not the case. They have a franchise model or public ownership model, both of which have their merits. They are certainly improvements on what we have. We can see that Greater Manchester and Liverpool are moving in that direction, and it's a crying shame that the Glasgow City region and South Lanarkshire within it are going to be held back because as of yet we don't have the means to do so. So I'll end by saying that the Liberal Democrat Group certainly support this motion, and I hope that things will change if this authority and other authorities in the region speak very loudly at every opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Provost. A new model doesn't actually always change something. We must first make absolutely certain we've got our targets sorted out. What do we need a bus service for? Well, it's to get people from A to B and actually back again. Currently, we have stories of buses leaving train stations as the train draws in, of one bus passing another, and people not being able to complete a journey at the one time. Even worse, on some occasions, being able to get somewhere, but not being able to get back home. So the focus must be on the timetabling. And if a new model comes out of that, good and well. but it has to be secondary to the production of the service that our communities need. And I think there is the possibilities within this motion for that to happen, but it needs to be within that realisation. What I would also say as Chair of the Rural Task Force is that transport in the rural area has been our #1 priority, and we are currently working on an initiative within that area, and I would hope that before too long we'll have some recommendations to come forward to the relevant committee to actually help there. But generally supportive of this, but mindful that it is timetabling that's important, not who pays the driver.
Yep, thank you. Can we have cross-party support, including the integrated amendments? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Now we're moving on to item 11 was withdrawn, and we're now moving on to item 12, which was the urgent business that I accepted from Councillor Brown. And we'll circulate that. And I'll pause for a couple of minutes to allow you to read that. No, I've done not bad.
Well through it. Yeah. Just gathering up my actions. I'll get what I need to do after. It just makes it complicated. I'm the Scottish Government. Who's Transport Minister now? Transport is...
Is that on Robert?
Should we take a 5-minute then?
Is that on Robert Brown's?
Aye.
Is it on Robert Brown's? No. Okay. Right. Okay. Colleagues, if you indulge me a moment, Councillor Ross has an urgent thing to do. I'll not elaborate on that, but I'll be going for a couple of minutes, and I'll take a 5-minute pause here to allow him to deal with his urgent business, to allow you to read the notice that's been circulated, and I would ask for the indulgence of our BSL users, as we're obviously at 10 to 12 when we would take a longer break. If they can bear with us, I would anticipate we'll be finished shortly after 12 o'clock. Thank you.
Oh.
What's the amendment to that?
Right, there we go.
Who's the Transport Minister again? I've lost track.
Bert.
Who's got that there?
That was the motion.
That's the motion.
Oh.
She's the amendment as well.
Oh. That's the motion.
Oh, maybe.
Can you stick that with me?
Maybe.
Okay. I've lost the plot. Oh yes, Robert, your urgent business, if you want to come forward with that now, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. On 30th of June 2023, the Scottish Government and COSLA entered into the Verity House Agreement. It was, they said, a new start for relations between the Scottish Government and local councils. It was supposed to be one of a number of key initiatives that marked out the style of the new First Minister, Humza Yousaf. Many people thought it was long overdue. The Scottish Government seemed to have something of a we-know-best attitude to local services. The police and emergency services had been centralised amidst much controversy. There was an attempt by the then Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, to seize the direction of education. That had been largely repulsed. Part of social work had been compulsorily hived off to the integrated joint boards, and the so-called National Care Service would, at a cost of £1 billion, remove care services and much else from council control. Again, something else rowed back in part by the new First Minister. But perhaps above all, ministers increasingly called the shots on council funding, and not to the benefit of local services or funding. Over the last decade, the Scottish Government's budget in real terms has gone up by over 4%, while council budgets, like for like, have gone down by over 9%, again in real terms. And each salami-slicing step of the process was accompanied by PR from the government, suggesting that hundreds of millions of pounds were coming the way of the councils, thanks to the largesse of government. And these sums always vanished like snow off a dike before the day was out. So Verity House looked at first glance promising, rooted in the European Charter of Self-Government, brandishing the mantra of local by default, national by agreement. It talked of the powers of local government not being undermined or limited by central government. There would be no ring fencing or direction of funding. Mutual respect was the new watchword. Sadly, far from being the start of a new Scottish Enlightenment, the Verity House Agreement has proved to be more like Stalin's 1936 Constitution for the Soviet Union, the most impeccable liberal constitution ever written, totally useless, totally paper in practice. Somewhat over 3 months later, the First Minister's conference announcement of a council tax freeze tore up the Verity House Agreement and made a total nonsense of its pious sentiments. We now know that it had neither cabinet sign-off nor even agreement from the First Minister's coalition partners. I can only imagine the First Minister has been styling himself on Boris, careering about through Scottish government finances like a supermarket trolley. But what are the implications of a council tax freeze? Firstly, we're told it will be fully funded. What does that mean? Is it some notional level like 3% plucked out of the air? Is it the inflation rate, which was 6.7% in September? Is it some higher rate reflecting the needs of the different councils? Perhaps the Scottish Government, in a fit of generosity, will reflect the above-inflation costs of energy, of construction works and the like. The precedents are not good. Last year, the inflation rate was 11.7%, but we're struck, as we still are, with a flat cash settlement, albeit with some knobs on relating to pay settlements and the like. Secondly, we've constantly been told that the Scottish Government has run out of money. Indeed, there have even been rumours that the bailiffs were being brought in, or the sheriff officers, I should say. According to the Auditor General, their commitments significantly exceeded their likely revenue. And certainly there was no hint of extra funding for councils, not even any sign of the modest swimming pool money made available at Westminster and coming to us through Barnett consequentials. That would have been very useful to the Leisure Trust. The stark fact is that even with a hefty council tax increase, this council, like all councils up and down Scotland, is still left with a huge gap in its finances caused by record inflation and by the Scottish Government's failure to provide the fair funding deal that COSLA has rightly demanded and which is backed by all parties at local government level. Government is about hard choices, and if the Scottish Government had 100 million or 200 million or maybe even 400 million to spare to fund the council tax freeze, then a better choice would have been to provide extra support to councils to sustain the local services that local people, not least the most deprived, rely on. But the Scottish Government claim it's all to help people out during the ongoing cost of living crisis. It is certainly odd they didn't think of that when they brought out their proposals to hike council tax for certain bands, hitting something like 25% of the population. But the reality is that a council tax freeze does next to nothing for families in poverty. The Institute for Public Policy Research stated that its main effect would be to reduce the financial burden on wealthier families whilst providing no benefit at all to the budgets of thousands of the lowest income households. The Scottish Government would, the IPPR said, have been far better targeting the money at those in greatest need with specific cost of living or income support measures. And even for people in work, the freeze was announced on pretty much the same day that the figures came out that average wages had for the first time for some time gone ahead of inflation. Let us be very clear. The Scottish Government, by its actions, proposes to take control of council budgets. They've already squeezed the core grant with a flat cash settlement. They've acted like Scrooge by cutting the share of the national cake, going to local services over a decade. Now they propose to decide on the level of council tax, not for reasons of principle or on the basis of evidence, but in order to provide a populist gesture which they hope will save their electoral bacon. As things stand, councils across Scotland have to balance their books. They've got no option but to cut staff, close leisure facilities, reduce teacher and social work numbers, reduce services. Every hall, every leisure centre or swimming pool forced to close. Every teacher or support assistant council cannot afford to close, to employ. Every care package that cannot be fulfilled, every pothole in the road that cannot be mended will be the responsibility and the fault of the Scottish Government. These are SNP cuts, fashioned by the First Minister, imposed by communities across Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Hamilton, East Kilbride and Clydesdale. Now, I've been long enough in politics to know that I don't usually get angry or carried away. I am angry about this. It's a bad use of limited resources. It will not help those most in need. It will further damage the sustainability of local services. But above all, it's a gross breach both of a major agreement so recently entered into and of the constitutional balance between local and central government. In more honourable times, such an action by a minister, far less the First Minister, should have led to resignation. Local government is important. It does good things. It can respond to a crisis like COVID with flair and flexibility in the way that central government ministers in Edinburgh or indeed London cannot. It delivers services and support to local people and local communities that higher authority cannot. It has a strong local democratic mandate of its own. Dare I say it, but the First Minister should be sent homeward to think again. I move the motion in my name.
Councillor McGeever.
Thanks very much, Provost. Just to confirm that I'm going to second it and largely echo what Robert said. To that, I would just add that I know that around this chamber we all take pride in being elected representatives of communities, not delegates from our political parties. So in this chamber, of all places, we should believe in local government decision making, local government's right to make decisions that affect its people and our autonomy, and we should stand up for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to Councillor Allison, I'm going to ask if Councillor Brown and McGeever accept the proposed amendment by the SNP.
Or to my seconder.
It's not acceptable. No. Okay, Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Provost. When you don't even consult your own cabinet before you make a major policy decision, that stinks of desperation. And simply there to woo the masses, because suggesting that a council tax freeze would be beneficial. What does it actually mean? Are they going to fully fund it? Fully fund it to what level? I am led to believe that councils are suggesting between 6 and 10% needed. Sorry for scaring people. Is that what's going to be funded? No suggestion of that. Because if they don't do that, they are simply going to introduce more cuts that we're going to need to make. More of our assets are going to need to be closed. I've lost 2 in my own ward already. It is not fully thought through. Furthermore, the bombshell directly contravenes the Verity House Agreement, as already been said, whereby the Scottish Government agreed to work closer, more collaboratively, partnerships with COSLA. Well, COSLA, never mind the Scottish Government, never knew what was coming, and stinks, quite simply, of the right hand not telling the left hand what it's doing, saying one thing and doing another. And it is not something that should be readily accepted. And as soon as people look into it, I'm pretty sure they will understand that. We've been in a perpetual state of financial decline under the SNP government, and that is not getting any better with the current Green coalition. Each and every council in Scotland has a huge funding gap of millions of pounds which must attempt to reduce through either raising council tax, which we will not now be able to do, or simply playing Russian roulette with our services. This is the SNP government cutting services, and the people who get the services are the most in need in our communities. And that's who they are looking to hit here. Freezing the council taxes is not the way forward. The fact that the UK government has funded the block grant to £41 billion per year, more than it has ever been in the past, yet all the Scottish Government can do is cut the funding for local services to local people by 9% over the past few years. It is time the SNP Green Government realised that and reversed their policy decisions so that we can support our local communities in the way they deserve. I'm pleased to hear that the proposer is not minded to support the amendments, because we could not support them either. And we are therefore glad and able to support the motion as it originally stands.
Thank you. Councillor Ross, can you elaborate on your proposed amendment, please?
Yeah, I would still like to propose the amendment. Provost, you'll not be surprised to hear I don't agree with most of the comments of the previous speakers, and I would probably like to make a comment. Initially, I find it really hard to understand why this item has been accepted as a piece of urgent business when such an important item that we proposed on humanitarian grounds in Gaza and Israel, where families throughout South Lanarkshire are experiencing trauma, was not accepted by this council. I know you won't come back on that, but that was my thoughts on that matter. In putting forward this amendment, we acknowledge an awful lot of the comments made by Robert on the Very House agreement between the Scottish Government and COSMA and the details thereof, but we still feel it's the responsibility of all levels of government to support households with financial pressures they are facing right now, and that's a result of the UK Government's economic policies. In the face of mounting financial challenges, we welcome the Scottish Government and our councils trying to do all they can with the limited powers at their disposal. And we welcome the announcement by the Scottish Government to freeze council taxes, which will benefit all council taxpayers in Scotland in over 2.5 million homes. With household bills rising, the freeze will give some certainty to households for the next financial year. And although inflation is slowly falling, the damage caused by the UK Government's economic agenda of austerity and Brexit have hurt everyone, but particularly our most vulnerable households. And I would love to see the other parties in this council chamber attack the UK Government for a change instead of attacking the Scottish Government. We welcome the announcement that this freeze will be fully funded and that the Scottish Government has committed to work with COSLA on the details of implementation over the coming weeks. And that will become clearer for everyone. But of course, we're trying to preempt a situation here when we actually have a body that works for all 32 councils in Scotland. So I would put forward our amendment on that basis. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Ross-Clark.
Thank you, Provost, and I fully support what our group leader, Councillor Ross, has said. And I also think it's very disappointing that this motion has been accepted, but the SNP one has not, similar to our amendment. There seems to be a bit of picking and choosing going on. Our party at COSLA has expressed concerns at the announcement, and we rightly do so, and we will continue to stand up for local government. But the Scottish Government is using, it seems to be pantomime season here, Provost. The Scottish Government is using the limited powers it has to help people during a cost of living crisis right now. We can't stop all bills rising, but Council tax is one of the few things we have control over. And if we can do that right now to support people, I think we should. There seems to be a bit of an ignorance about the financial challenges that we're facing, as Councillor Ross alluded to, of the Tory UK government crashing the economy. If it wasn't for the Trust's mini-budget and all their other policies, would perhaps have had more money in the Scottish Government's disposal. And I do have to point out the Labour and other parties flip-flopping on this. At first, they were all about keeping council tax low. Then they raise it above what we proposed at the budget. Then they ran a campaign against a proposed council tax hike, but then they're against the council tax freeze, and now they seem to be for it. So I'm still confused as to what their position is. They're either for increased council tax or they're not. As I said, we're using the powers that we have. This isn't a back and forth. I'm speaking and I'm elected to this council to represent my constituents, and I will continue to do that. And I will not be shouted down by any Labour member. We are using the limited powers we have to support people during a cost of living crisis, millions of homes in the country. And if we can stop their bills from rising, we should.
Thank you. Can I advise members to restrain themselves and to act with decorum while speakers are engaged? I would ask for brevity where possible from the following. I'll take there's we have 4 people wishing to speak, and that'll be the end of it. So we'll start with Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Provost, and perhaps I will just begin by drawing attention to the remarks of the COSLA President, Shona Morrison, who issued a statement following this announcement to say that Scotland's council leaders again reiterated their extreme disappointment that the First Minister chose to undermine the spirit and the letter of the Verity House agreement so soon after it being signed, and that the chronic underfunding of councils right across the country is there for all to see and has been laid bare by this latest announcement. If the First Minister really wants to help people in financial crisis, funding councils fairly will save jobs and services and avoid closures and cuts. I could read out the rest of that statement, but I won't, given you asked for brevity, and I have more to say. Now, I don't think there's any more to add to what Councillor Brown had to say about the chaotic approach to policy making by the Scottish Government. The Verity House agreement, as you have heard, is in tatters. The Government's financial credibility is shot to pieces. But most importantly, local government's capacity to manage a funding crisis, a crisis that is not of our making and a crisis that has never been worse, has now become infinitely more challenging and uncertain and unpredictable. If the Scottish Government believes there is action on council tax that is needed to help people through the cost of living crisis, and they are entitled to that view, then the Scottish Government should respect the democratic right of councils to set tax locally and engage with us as partners in a spirit of cooperation and respect to achieve that outcome. We need more than empty promises to repair the relationship between under-resourced councils and a failing and frankly untrustworthy government. We should have been convinced already as partners to government that this intervention is the best one, because unlike other household bills that are rising, what people pay in council tax does not fund the corporate profits of energy giants or tech companies. It funds our local services, and it helps us protect South Lanarkshire from those core funding cuts that the First Minister and his predecessor repeatedly voted to impose on our councils, our workers, our people and our communities. And the Government must also convince us that they can identify the resources to fully fund this council tax freeze with no detriment to the local government funding settlement, because that has not happened in the past. Indeed, even with substantial increases in council tax, as Councillor Brown alluded to, many councils would still find themselves faced with unpalatable choices. The local government funding settlement would still have to rise substantially if cuts were to be avoided. Now, I'm reassured that all these points will be made at the COSLA level to the Scottish Government. I am not reassured, based on their track record, that the Government realise the consequences of what they have committed to, or that they much care. And let me elaborate on that, because I'm not convinced that we will receive a funding settlement that is adequate or that fully recompenses councils for the council tax rises they would otherwise have to forego. And I don't think the public is reassured either, because bluntly, if we don't have the resources in our public services to keep people safe, to have an adequate number of fire appliances in our communities, to make a pay offer to our workforce that can prevent strikes next week, to fund essential services fairly, then why should any of us believe that the government have the resources to fully fund this council tax freeze? And as things stand, and this is the key point, as things stand, this is an unfunded council tax freeze. The Economy Secretary said it in BBC Scotland 2 weeks ago. They have still to find the resources to make this work. And if the council tax freeze is not fully funded, then our local services and facilities, already at risks because, and I accept, because of the twin terrors of inflation and underfunding, will be placed in grave jeopardy. And it is the people who are most vulnerable in a cost of living crisis who depend on our public services most. And can I maybe just turn to this amendment and some of the other contributions that have been made? I mean, I've got an idea. The amendment essentially welcomes the announcement that the council tax freeze will be fully funded. I've set out why right now. I don't think any of us can be reassured that that is the case. I have an idea for a budget savings. We will simply sell magic beans to the SNP group and South Lanarkshire Council. But I've got to say, the amendment itself, it is an obsequious, servile little amendment from a party that has oscillated, and let's take this point, that has oscillated from a position of a 20% or an increase of up to 20% in council tax rises on some households to now a freeze because the First Minister was under pressure going into his conference. That is no way to make policy. And they're right, the Scottish Labour Party successfully, I might add, campaigned against reforms that would have increased bills by up to 20% for Band E and up. That is now a matter of record. That has happened. We are now dealing with the next challenge, which is how do we navigate the budget that is to come. And the deliberate confusion of separate issues with the First Minister's chaotic announcement, I think, is frankly desperate low politics from a party that is in freefall and not the principled leadership we need to get us through the multiple crises we face at this time, including a council funding crisis made in Scotland by the Scottish Government, as Account Commission figures show. I think the First Minister's approach has been chaotic. It's a bad way to make policy. We need to say so. That's why we need to pass the motion, and we need to press the government collectively for the best funding settlement possible to prevent a worsening funding crisis and to secure a fairer share of public spending for the people of South Lanarkshire. We've got to be absolutely clear about what our funding ask is of government, the best possible settlement and a fully funded council tax freeze, and we will believe it when we see it.
I'll continue to seek brevity as we move forward. There's still one or two people with points to make. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you to Councillor Fagan for such a passionate statement. And I wholeheartedly agree with what's already been said by the Councillor, God, I forgot his name already, Councillor Brown and other speakers before. I've just got to say Robert. But so, thank you, Provost. And I think the SNP amendment is always about the big bad UK government. But let's look at the pantomime that Councillor Ross mentions. Let's look at some of the chaos. The doomed National Care Service, it costs around £700,000 for what? A spending of £1.4 million for mobile phones for prisoners. Costs of the failed ferries of over £500 million. A botched census of over £27 million. The botched Rangers prosecution case of £51 million. £1.5 million spent in civic service preparing for an unwanted Indy Ref 2. £250,000 wasted in an Indy Ref 2 court case. The list goes on, Provost. Yet we sit here from the SNP blaming the UK government for not giving them fair funding. Spend the money the way that it's put to you and you won't have this crisis. But the list goes on, as I said. But let's just think of one thing. Maybe the discussion of this council tax freeze took place in WhatsApp. We know what happens there. Delete.
Okay, Councillor David Watson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be supporting the motion by Councillor Brown, and I think it's regrettable that the SNP group's brought forward what can only be described as an apologist motion. The First Minister at the SNP conference made an announcement which showed total disrespect and disregard for local government and recently signed agreements. It also showed total disrespect and regard for something that I hold very dear in the Scottish Parliament. And we're looking for better standards from our politicians at that level, in fact, at all levels. So, as I say, the motion as it stands, I'm happy to support. And going on to the actual amendment, there's reference to giving some certainty to households. What if this was passed? There's no certainty then to our finances. There's no certainty to our constituents that depend on education and social work services. There's no certainty in what's happening with our roads, our libraries, our halls, our leisure facilities and the environment that we live in. Because quite frankly, if we don't get proper funding from through the council tax and through the Scottish Government, we're in a downward spiral, and we all know that. But maybe the SNP don't know that. Because Councillor Clark mentions we're ignorant of the financial challenges we're facing, but maybe Councillor Clark and his colleagues are ignorant of the financial challenges this council is facing, because they failed to turn up at budget seminars and budget meetings that we're being told by the Director of Finance the problems that this council is going to be in. So, happy to support the motion, and hopefully it's passed by acclaim. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Margaret Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Provost, sorry. I'd like to support the motion and also to sort of re-emphasise the council tax is a disproportionate tax. The people most in need actually don't pay it and also rely quite heavily on our services. So it's disingenuous to say that it is going to help people in terms of cost of living or access and services or whatever. It's like most things that come out of the Scottish Government, it's completely disingenuous and nonsense in terms of accuracy. I won't repeat, Councillor Nelson kind of stole some of my thunder, so I won't repeat the list that he went through, but also just concur with him. The money wasted in the incompetency of trying to establish a national care service is nothing less than a national disgrace, and we still don't seem to be at the point where we've actually achieved that, but we have also wasted millions on it, and I would add the other 20 million to the referendum, among other things. But if the Scottish Government seriously wants to help the most vulnerable and those in need, could I say, as Chair of Social Work and Deputy Chair of the IGB, give us back the 335 million that you've clawed back from local authorities for the COVID monies. Then you might stand a reasonable chance of making an impact, a positive impact in people's lives, not with this nonsense. With that, I support the motion. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, my apologies to those that are not going to take further speakers in this. I'm going to allow Councillor Robert Brown to conclude on his motion.
Very much, Provost, and thank you for those who contributed to the debate. I'm bound to say that I think many of the speeches have spoken for themselves, including the speeches of the SNP leadership. I note that their amendment is phrased in 9-point print, and I think that's actually symptomatic, because this is a weaselly little amendment which they're trying not to have much attention paid to. I don't actually think they believe it themselves, because Councillor Ross, to be fair to him, has in previous situations taken a much more robust view about the rights of local government and rights of local government finance. Now, this is not a normal party political slag type motion. It really isn't. It's about the fundamental relationship between central and local government. Councillor Ross asked about why we weren't attacking the UK government, not the Scottish government. Well, I think Joe Fagan in his comments made some observations about the background of inflation, but this is not the UK government's council tax freeze. This is the Scottish government's council tax freeze. And I don't think that John Ross seems to have taken this fully on board. Councillor Clark spoke about continuing to stand up for the rights of local government. Well, I'm bound to say if that's him standing up for the rights of local government, I'd hate to see him attacking local government. It does seem to me that he's got the actual balance wrong. It is the time for people to stand up across parties for local government, but more significantly for local government services and for the communities that are served by local government services. That's what this motion at the end of the day is about. We've gone through the background, we've had the debate about all of that. Really, there needs to be movement by the Scottish Government on this matter. OK, we're in the realm, they are the government, they've announced the council tax freeze, despite the difficulties of the way in which they've done that. No doubt that's something that's going to go through. If that's going to be the case, they've got to make it happen in a fairly funded, proper fashion to support local government. And they must not neglect the existing financial problems that lay behind this before they ever came along with the council tax freeze proposal. This is an important motion. Thank you for the contribution people have made towards it. Let's support the motion and strongly reject the amendment.
Okay, I'm going to ask Susan to move to an electronic vote on the motion and the amendment. Has the amendment been moved?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
It was. Councillor Ross and Councillor Clark.
Councillor Ross and Councillor Clark moved the amendment. So if we can have an electronic vote, please.
Okay, I'm just about to start the vote. Before you, you have a motion proposed by Councillor Brown and seconded by Councillor McGeever, and that's been circulated in person and by email. And by way of amendment, we have Councillor Ross, seconded by Councillor Clark. They've moved an amendment, and that's also been circulated. So I'm just about to commence the vote. For those in the room, please press firmly on your choice. Once voted, the colour on your option box you have chosen will infill, and it should be blue for motion, red for amendment, and orange for abstain. It will also state on your microphone unit that your vote has registered, so please press firmly. For those attending remotely, the appropriately coloured box will appear on the right-hand side of your screen, showing how you voted once your vote has been registered. Okay. I think I'm still waiting on one or two people. Again, there's a check on the screen. If you have voted, the box in your name will have a broken line. So your delegate unit should tell those in the room that you have voted, that it's taken. The colour should infill and it should confirm that. I think I'm waiting for one more member according to the numbers that I think I have. A couple of people have left the meeting. If anyone's having technical difficulties, can they please text the number that was given earlier? And I'll just repeat that number. Is 07557 323 097. As I say, I think I'm maybe perhaps waiting on one more member.
It's not voted.
All right, thank you. It would appear that he's away. I think perhaps a further councillor, Councillor Lambie, I think if you're still in the meeting, but it looks as if you've left, if you're still in the meeting, if you could cast your vote, please.
No.
Okay, I'm just going to close the vote then. Okay, and there was 34 voted for the motion, 22 for the amendment, and we have 1 abstention. The motion is therefore declared carried. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I'll just shut that down. Right, there we go.
Councillor Loudon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Clark said earlier that there was some picking and choosing going on about motions and speakers, and I'm inclined to agree. We've just seen speaker after speaker before this vote allowed to speak well over the time limit specified in the standing orders, many of them attacking our group. Our group had 1 speaker waiting who had no right to reply. As usual, our group had no right to reply in face of the pantomime across from us. Yes, I am misusing this point of order to note that, and I do deserve to be chastised for that, but frankly, it appears we need to use any means at our disposal to have our say.
I'd already said that I would allow 3 more speakers, and the councillor you're referring to came in after that. I allowed Councillor Brown in to conclude his motion. Okay, so that's the response to your point of order. Okay, we're moving on now to the final part of the meeting. Yeah, I can conclude, we're at item 13 here, and I can confirm that the public section of the meeting